right, welcome back, everybody, to the second of our Afterthoughts sessions for Hotel Bar Sessions podcast, where we take a minute to look back on the last 3 episodes and try to figure out what we woulda, coulda, or shoulda said. So this episode, I'm joined by my 2 co-hosts, Dr. Rick Lee and Dr. Charles Peterson. How are you doing? Where are you, Rick? You've been in Poland and then you were back in Chicago. I don't even know where you are.
I am currently in Florida. So I got back from Poland. 3 days later, my sister and I drove my parents' car from Chicago to Florida, which I will never do again. It's a long ass way from Chicago to Florida.
Oh yeah, I've done that drive. It's insane.
Yeah.
I feel like Rick is on a tour of like, where can I go where I'll be most likely to get COVID?
Right.
So I'm assuming he's coming to Tennessee next. So I look forward to seeing you in a little while.
Rick Lee is on the COVID Catch Me If You Can tour.
Yeah, right.
Next stop, Michigan.
All right. So this Afterthoughts episode, we're going to be looking back over the last 3 episodes. So our episode on titled Legally Right, Legally Wrong. Our episode.
Nope. Legally Right, Morally Wrong.
Legally Right, Morally Wrong. Whoopsie. Legally Right, Morally Wrong. Our episode that we did with Sarti Singh on the Global South, and then our episode on Transcendence. So let me pitch it to you first, Charles. What did you think afterwards? What are your afterthoughts about the Legally Right, Morally Wrong episode?
I feel like that I stated a lot of the points of concern about this type of what happened with the Rittenhour case and what it certainly suggests and bodes for the future of American, social, legal life, even just civil culture. And on this day, Joe Manchin just announced that he would not be supporting the Build Back Better legislation. And to me, this is just another step in this way of sort of disconnecting this question of what's right from what's actually ethical or morally beneficial or what's civically responsible. And the farther we go down this road, I think it's going to eat away at the possibility of maintaining sort of the United States as an active working civil society.
What about you, Rick?
Yeah, I thought, I think we talked about it during the episode, but that episode fit in really nicely coming after our discussion with Chuck. That I think those 2 episodes dovetail really nicely. One thing that struck me is that it's interesting to me that 2 cases were going on at the same time. Mm-hmm. One we call after the actual perpetrator, so the Rittenhouse trial. The other one we named after the victim, the Aubrey trial.
Right.
And he was not on trial, right? I mean, I suppose in a way he was on trial, but I find that to be really interesting, that I bet if you asked people about the actual perpetrators, well, now convicted murderers, or I forget what they were convicted of, that their names aren't really as well known. I don't know what to say about it, but I find that really interesting.
Yeah, I was just thinking right now, I can't even think of what their names were. The 3 men who shot and killed Aubrey.
2 of them have the same name, McDougal,
because they're father and son, I think.
Right. Yes, father and son, yeah.
Yeah, that is interesting. I mean, I hadn't thought about that, but I don't know why that is. I mean, I'm thinking, yeah, like in the George Floyd case, I think most of us refer to it as the Chauvin trial.
Yeah.
Right.
But then I'm thinking like in the Rodney King case, we called it the Rodney King case.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, that might be an interesting thing to look at, is sort of if we can trace some kind of consistency in how these things come to be called in popular culture, by either the victim's name or the perpetrator's names.
Well, who remembers the name of Emmett Till's murderers?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And I think that's the case because the face of the victim defines, right, the nature and circumstances of it. And so that's the name that sticks and becomes most apparent. I think that, and I'm not sure that's the right thing to do, because we should remember the name of the people that engage in these acts of violence.
But on the other hand, Charles, don't you worry about the kind of glorification then? Like I worry about that with Rittenhouse, that now he's a hero. I mean, the very next that very evening he's on Tucker Carlson, and so like everyone on the right knows Kyle Rittenhouse. I wish we had talked about 3 victims, right? There were 3. I wish we had talked about them much more and used their names much more than his stupid name.
Well, I think too, and going back to the example of Emmett Till and his murderers, we don't know their names, and so it's easier for them to move back into the regular flow of society, right? They have an anonymity that they can use to shield. Like no one remembers the name of the woman, right, that made the false accusation against Till until she just died recently, confessing that she was lying about what she said. She was pressured by her
surprise.
Yeah, right. Surprise. So I think it's necessary to keep their names attached. And for some quarters of society, they will be glorified. They will be seen as heroes, sadly, tragically. And that doesn't matter whether or not their name is attached or not attached. But I think for those of us who will not glorify them, their names should be kept in the public eye with the attachment of convicted murderer or accused murderer or killer of. I think Kyle Rittenhour, as long as he lives, should be Kyle Rittenhour, who murdered 2 people.
Yeah.
Or, now, murdered is an actual technical legal term, but who killed 2 people.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, to be honest, I'm not sure I have much to add. I do think that, maybe when I listened back to the episode when it finally aired, I really did sort of think a lot about the way that we titled it, Legally Right, Morally Wrong. And because I think in some of the cases that we discussed, it was legally wrong and morally wrong.
Right.
If it weren't for all of the kind of dog and pony show trickery, strategery of the prosecutors or the defendants' attorneys, that we could have had something that was both legally right and morally right. So yeah, I mean, I'm not entirely positive that I would say that even in the cases that we talked about, that they were legally right decisions. They were sort of like legally permissible, right? It was possible to get away with those, but I'm not sure that.
But that's a thing that, going back to the guns episode of last season, Charles was the first one to sort of put on my radar the tremendous difference between but also importance of self-defense statutes, stand your ground statutes, and all of these requirements. And I think that Wisconsin doesn't have a what is it called, a request to retreat or a requirement to retreat. That has serious implications, and I think the Rittenhouse verdict is playing that out. And so I think I'm starting to pay more attention to the differences in states and even local jurisdictions about these laws.
Yeah, I'd also really like for us to revisit this question whenever we hear what the Supreme Court has decided about Roe v. Wade, because there is clearly a case where the moral arguments and the legal arguments are so intimately intertwined that it'll be interesting how that gets parsed out.
Yeah.
All right, so let's move on. So the next episode that we're going to talk about today is the really great episode that we had where Rick and I got a chance to interview Surti Singh, and we folded that into a larger discussion between the 3 of us about the Global South, and in particular, this work that Dr. Singh is doing on critical theory in and from the Global South. So, Rick, let me go to you first, since you know her work the best.
Yeah. No, I thought that conversation was really interesting. I thought that for those of us like me who were trained in European philosophy and its history, to find that there are philosophers and scholars around the Global South who are finding resources within that tradition on the one hand, but then also actually contributing back to that tradition in really interesting ways to further enrich it in ways that these German white dudes probably couldn't ever imagine. I thought that was really interesting and a kind of model for how philosophy should be done going forward.
No, I regret not meeting Dr. Surti. I think I would have really enjoyed being directly connected to the conversation, but I love the fact that her work is sort of making me rethink some of the great thinkers that motivated me to go into philosophy as an undergrad and shape the direction of my graduate career. Like obviously Frantz Fanon is a towering figure in that formulation. And I like the idea of returning back to this type of discourse and using it, reconfiguring it to get a better sense of where we are in the world.
Yeah, I listening back to that episode, it reminded me a little bit of a conversation that we had last season in our episode on specializations, where we were talking about the importance of specialists in particular areas. And I suppose, now what I would say is that I'm very glad that there are people out there like Surti Singh who have this comparative knowledge that I can draw from. I think that, I worry that, I just don't have coverage in enough specializations to adequately address a lot of the things that I would like to address in order to, for example, diversify my syllabus or bring in other voices or take different perspectives. But I worry if people just kind of try to do that ad hoc, that it just ends up sort of reproducing the same kind of problem that we have right now. And so, yeah, I'm really glad. I'm looking forward to this anthology that she's putting out, and I'm really glad that there are people like her out there doing that work.
Yeah, and Lee, that's so interesting, and I think important because part of my in that specialization episode, part of my claim was, right now I've been spending several hours a day reading medieval manuscripts, and that's a skill I have, and you don't learn that overnight, and but scholars like Surti and her whole entire team that she's in partnership with in this project, they're going to provide resources for us that I think are really important, as you put it, for our teaching and our research in general. And they are providing a scholarly community and scholarly resources for us that I think it's really a tremendous asset.
I've also really, again, I know I said this in the episode, but I've also really been kind of obsessed with this word that the title of that anthology that she has that's coming out, Extimacies. I think that I've just keep trying to sort of work through that concept of extimacy. I think it's completely fascinating. I'm assuming that it's going to be explained in the intro to that anthology. So, Surti, if you're watching this, feel free to send me a PDF of the intro in advance. I would love to read it. I'm actually over here bothered by this concept, and I would love to get some resolution in my own mind.
And I want to apologize. I meant to say Dr. Singh and not Dr. Surti. So my apologies.
Yes. Do you guys have, this probably doesn't happen to you. I think this is definitely a woman thing, but I frequently have students who will call me Dr. Lee, like even when they send me emails. Y'all don't have that though. Nobody says Dr. Rick, right?
They actually,
or Dr. Charles.
I find that they do for weird reans. Like they're not used to the title doctor, and they're not really sure how it works, I think. But a lot of students don't even know my first name.
That's
interesting. Yeah. I think in the South, there's this long tradition of calling elder women. Older women. I'm not elder. I'm older. But calling older women, like Miss Lee, Miss Dorothy, Miss Janice, or whatever. So I do think that it's also a Southern thing. But anyway, okay, let's move on to what I just want to preface this by saying. in the whole 3 seasons of Hotel Bar podcast so far, I think this episode on transcendence is definitely one of my favorites. This was a fantastic conversation. I loved it so much, and I learned so much. I feel like it went a lot of different places. It was both really focused and really sort of had plenty of room to breathe. So I'm actually really excited to hear what you guys thought after hearing it back. Charles, we'll go back to you.
I've said this before, that I learned so much philosophy from the two of you, right? I think Lee is sort of this really nice sort of overlap between what Rick does and who Rick has read and is familiar with, and the type of work that I do. You know, I was not fully grounded in a more canonical, right, philosophical sort of approach. So when we have these types of discussions, really philosophy types of discussions, I really enjoy it. And I'm taking notes, all kinds of notes about, oh, this text and that text, whatever. So I loved it for that. It was a lesson for me. But I also liked it because, you know, Rick can be a very rigorous, or should we say a rigorous.
He's got Rick Mortis.
Sorry, Rick Mortis. He has great Ricker in his interrogation. But one thing I love about these conversations with both of you is that it really forces me to clarify, to get clear, to become much more fine-tuned and specific about what I think, what I mean, and what I'm saying. And I think that was a great moment in terms of how I thought about my assumptions about transcendence and having to strip away what I realize and what I don't mean and what I do mean. So thank you both for that.
Yeah, I mean, so we all were, I mean, this is why it was such a great episode. And I think it was a great episode because as we all have talked offline, this notion of transcendence in various ways has like poked its head into a lot of our conversations. In the transcendence episode, we referred back to the music episode a lot. But I think because it had been bubbling up, that's what made it such a rich conversation. And I also learned a lot, and the two of you sort of brought me not a small distance from my original position, not in the Rawls sense, but my own, my starting point, to seeing a notion of transcendence that not only is, let's say, palatable, but perhaps even also necessary for things that I'm invested in. So I really enjoyed that process of like, I feel like we were all in the lab, not the thought, it wasn't a thought experiment, but we were in the lab and we were like working hard and we actually made something, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree. I will say that this is one of those episodes where when I was listening to it back, there were so many moments where, and I mean, this is such a philosopher thing to say, but I know we've all had this experience where just a word, right? If I had said that with just like one word different, and so, you know, it would have been clear. And I was, you know, and I was listening to it back, I was like, no, that's not exactly what I meant to say, right? You know, and I wanted to say like, oh, you know, like I have to remember to correct this in the afterthoughts, but I do think that, you know, in general, you know, basically what I wanted to say came out. I think in retrospect, what I realized though, and this is not something that I was trying to express and failed to express. It's only something that I realized in listening to myself try to talk through these sorts of questions. But I think that what I realized in retrospect is that I don't actually believe in, I mean, that's a sort of sloppy way to say this, but I don't actually believe in a transcendent or a transcendence. So I think that there were a lot of times when I was saying X is transcendence. And what I meant was it's a experience of transcendence, or it's a transcendent experience, or it's an experience of transcending. And so I think now I would be much more comfortable in saying something like that transcendence is it's either an activity or it's an experience, right? But I don't think, because I think where Rick and I got caught up in that episode was Rick was describing something as a transcendent perspective. And I think when I listened to it back, I was like, I just don't believe there is such a thing. as a transcendent perspective, because a transcendent perspective would mean that there's something like a conscious thing that is a transcendence, right? That has a perspective. And that I'm pretty sure I don't believe in. So yeah. So I suppose, this is what's great about some of these episodes, is that they are so clarifying and distilling of my own thoughts. And this was just an exemplar of that.
It's like the philosophical sort of equivalent of like the radiation showers from Silkwood.
That's exactly how I think about my conversations with you, as radiation showers.
That's right. We're all in the showers together, scrubbing each other with the really hard bristle brushes.
I have to say that, and I don't remember which of you came up with it, but the notion of fragile transcendence has been something that has stuck with me since that episode. And I think that's a really interesting concept.
Actually, Rick, you're the one that came up with that. I remember. Yeah. I mean, you said that.
Way to pat yourself on the back. Well done. Well done.
He's like, I can't remember. Maybe it was me, but yeah. But you were
someone
the one
said something really just ingenious. I mean, what could that have been?
But you're the one who named it fragile transcendence. Earlier in the episode, Charles and I had been talking about like what we called like a more pedestrian sense of transcendence. But yeah, you named it fragile transcendence, and yeah, and kudos to you. It was a really great naming of.
Well, I think.
Oh, I think you froze a little bit.
I froze. Yeah.
So say that again.
I thank me.
Oh.
And the world thanks you.
And the world thanks you. Thank you for that.
All right, you guys. Well, I appreciate you getting together today to look back on these past 3 episodes. We've got some really exciting new episodes coming up, including an episode on social media. We've got a great interview with Jason Reed coming up, where we're going to be talking about work. So there's lots of exciting things coming up, and we will be back for another Afterthoughts episode after the next 3 episodes right here on the Hotel Bar Sessions YouTube channel. Don't forget, you can always check us out on Twitter at Hotel Bar Podcast. We're also on the web, www.hotelbarpodcast.com. We're coming up. So we're recording this the week before Christmas. So happy holidays to all of you. And I'll see you guys next time.
Bye.
Bye.